very pleased to see you for this talk at the opening of Spencer Finch's new exhibition, Ex Nihilo, and welcome Spencer back to London. This is Spencer's second exhibition at the gallery. In 2008, you did a show that included, two installations and a large video and media sculpture referencing places as far afield as New Zealand, Southwest United States, and Moon. So this is a very different matter. It's a much more concise, studio-based project, but that's just the beginning of the work, and we'll look forward to talking more widely about it. I am croaking, I apologize. Joining us is Andrea Schlieker, very distinguished curator, lecturer, and writer who's done a lot of work, very ambitious work in the public realm in recent years. Andrea was the initiator and first curator of the Folkestone Triennial in 2008, and invited Spencer to take part in the last one last year. So welcome, Andrea.
Thank you.
So we're going to talk for about half an hour, 40 minutes, and open up to questions. And Spencer, I wanted to start, since we're sitting in this exhibition, to ask you a little bit about it. As I said, we'll expand from it, but you work in your studio, you work in the public realm, you work in museums, but you said that one of your favorite things to do is to do gallery shows, and I just wonder if you can say something about what it is about this context that you find particularly intriguing or liberating or inspiring.
I think one thing is the sort of architectural space is really, the sort of more sort of discrete, specific architectural spaces are interesting to me as a way to contextualize the work and to work more modestly. I think, especially this gallery, which has a number of different spaces, is really the kind of structure that I often like, because it has a sort of specificity. And so it was really fun actually working with Joanna and thinking about what work is going to make sense where and how the different works interact, which is something that's very interesting to me. Also, the idea that it's an exhibition that's up for a month, so it's a discrete period of time, and if it's a disaster, the month goes by and then, no one remembers. And if it goes well, then people come, they'll see it, and they also spend time with it, because it's not like an art fair where there's other things right there, and or like a museum where there's lots of other things to look at. So you have, I think, in a gallery you have a captive audience, and usually an informed audience that has sort of enters into it with the right spirit, I think.
Evidently, yeah. And this idea of a show that draws on your experiences at the studio, that's a very particular idea, and it might be interesting if you just tell us how you arrived at that.
Well, it started with the work in the front room that passed through the studio, which I was working on the summer when I had a lot of time just by myself, and was working just on studio-based work and not on bigger public projects or fabricated projects. And it's really the kind of work that I like. I think, like, looking back over 20 years of working in the studio, the work that I'm proudest of is the work that comes when I'm just sitting in my studio chair, which is this by now a pretty run-down looking chair, orange, and not knowing what to do, and eventually something happens, I remember there was an early work that I did my studio is right near the Gowanus Canal, which is one of the most polluted waterways in the country. And it smells a lot in the summer. So there was a hot August day in 1994, and it was almost too hot to work, and I could just smell the canal, and so I ended up, I don't know how, I started thinking about making drawings of the smell. And so it's a series of drawings trying to do a sort of a synesthesia, trying to do these drawings of the smell of the canal, which is work that I still really like a lot, but it's something that just sort of came from being there, and a sort of a compulsion to work. It's sort of Beckett-like in this way, you know, that there's nothing to say, and then at the same time an obligation to express. And I think that contradiction is sort of inherent when you're just in the studio and making something happen.
Well, I think a lot of people who've seen your work elsewhere might be slightly surprised by some of the works, especially the work here behind you, which, together with several other works, refer very much to painting. So your leitmotif in your works, I think it's fair to say, is a perceptual exploration, and which involves a recreation of particular moments and places. And here, obviously, you have deliberately limited yourself or restricted yourself to the perceptual exploration from your studio. But I just thought it would be interesting to talk, if you could talk a little bit about your relationship to painting, because what looks like an almost sort of modernist painting here, again, is, of course, recreating a very particular event, or in this case, the temperature of your studio window. But could you maybe talk a little bit about painting, abstraction, and representation in your work?
Yeah, well, I really like painting a lot. I mean, I wasn't trained as a painter. I took some painting classes, but I love painting. I think it's what I look at the most, and I think I sort of have. I'm sort of in a bit of a two-dimensional rut. It's hard for me sometimes to think in 3 dimensions, and but I love looking at painting. It's something that I do a lot, and that I'm fascinated with, and color especially. And I think especially abstract painting. And I mean, I part of me would love to be an abstract painter, but I'm not. I feel that there has to be some sort of connection to the world, and so I'm not. I also don't like representation, so I don't like I don't like representation. I don't like abstraction, and so I try to find some sort of middle path with work that sort of looks abstract but is in fact representational. So, I mean, the problem is that there's no sort of convention for how to look at something like this, because it is. I mean, something as weird as this like light box right here on the wall, which is a sort of LED light box, which it is representational because it is a photograph of the sunset from the studio, but it's also abstract in that it's filtered so that the light, and there's too much ambient light in here now, but if there's no ambient light, the light that's emitted from that is the exact color of being in the sunset, which is.
And it's abstract. The view from your studio.
From the roof of the studio, yeah. Hello, Erica.
But you've also looked at painters like Turner or Monet.
Yes, and you know, wherever I go, I like look at things, and you know, just on Sunday I had time to. Joanna gave me the day off, and I was able to to look at some things. And I went to the National Gallery, and I'd never seen that Dürer portrait of his father before, which is this amazing painting. And so, I mean, I don't know if I'll get anything out of that because it's so different, and it's such a different, you know, it's just such a different idea of art. But I love looking at it, and I love talking about those works. And
I mean, there seem to be so many connections in your work that can be made to painting and also to other things, of course. But you work in series very often. There's almost this old-fashioned way of working outside, this en plein air, which the Impressionists used to do, because you actually go to the places and make your drawings there. When we did Folkestone together, I remember on that hot day when you were recording all the colors of the water in watercolor. And at the same time, the form of the monochrome keeps coming back. And of course, in each case, there's a narrative there, because here it's the snowflakes melting. But you've also done the black squares, which seem to refer to Malevich, which is, you know, your pursuit of darkness, or your series of orange rectangles, which was, if I remember correctly, it was the Grand Canyon and the light on the retina with your eyes closed. So, in a way, to make a painting while from an impression with your eyes closed seems to be denying the very process of what painters often do, which is obviously seeing.
Yeah, I think it's some combination of being very conventional and unconventional at the same time, and trying to put those two things together. I mean, these are very sort of conventional objects in this room. Certainly, it's very sort of conventional. I mean, there are works on paper pretty much, and yet it's a sort of system that is, I think, a bit unconventional. But it's also, I think, some. I mean, it's also, I guess, a sensibility. I'm a little hesitant about using that word, but I think, you know, when I was in school, like, my teachers were minimalists, and I was, you know, sort of, you know, I sort of accepted that vocabulary, that sort of grammar, and that sort of rule making, and so I think that sort of really sort of inherent in the way I work. And we were speaking a little bit earlier about that, and when I teach now, sometimes that idea of this sort of rules, this sort of structure as a way of working is most students now don't sort of understand it, and so it's I think younger artists work very differently. But, you know, I'm sort of stuck in my ways. It's like, once it's done, it's done. You know, you don't, like, when I'm doing these like paths of the B flights. You know, it is a record of the B flights. And if the last one would look better with one more violet line in there, I don't do it unless there's actually a bee flying there.
I guess that's one difference. You know, it's really interesting to push what's the same and what's different from other artists, as well, particularly painters. But I guess most painters are somehow motivated by form, by, you know, having a way of translating the world into a kind of repertoire of gestures or forms, and you don't. I mean, you find suitable forms, but you don't repeat yourself that often. You always seem to be pushing, and it is that sort of carrying across of content into whatever form most well represents it.
Right, but I think it also rises out of some sort of insecurity that if you don't have something if you don't have some, like, outer, you know, some outer sort of information or power, like telling you what to, you know, sort of making the decision, then you're sort of, I would be sort of paralyzed if I was just sort of making a painting about my feeling or something.
Well, the other thing I wondered, and that's kind of the other side of it, of the form, is the content side. Like, I like the light box of darkness in there, which I guess carries an idea that you had the date of the work with the drawings, the darkness.
Yeah, I mean, I started them in 96, I think.
I mean, you look at a image, either drawing or light box of drawing, and of darkness, and, you know, there's a lot in darkness. There's nightmares and you know, atavistic memories. Do you want people to see those things, or do you see those things, or do you just see darkness?
Yeah, I see. I mean, of course, I see sort of subjectivity, but I don't see that sort of specificity. But I do. I mean, it is some sort of blank screen, I guess, on which things can be projected. But you know, that's not
why you do it.
Well, I mean, it's intended to be open in that way, but I don't have anything specific that I'm projecting. But I'm very interested in this idea of the sort of this sort of blank screen, and the question is, how can you do that without it sort of collapsing into cliché?
But I mean, the work, I don't know whether all of you have seen that work of the light box in here. It's just, it connects. I want to ask you one last question about your influences or antecedents, because when I saw it for the first time earlier today, I did bring to mind the work of James Turrell and the whole, you know, 1960s and 70s Californian light and space movement. In what way? I mean, I know your work is, you know, formally there seems to be a relationship, but of course you go elsewhere and you come from elsewhere. But it would be interesting, I think, to hear you talk a little about the connection and the differences.
Yeah. I have a friend actually who's a curator who one of his ways of categorizing artists is whether they love Turrell or hate Turrell, and he can also tell. He claims to be able to tell. You know, he, like, just by looking at the artist's work, you know. And I am among the latter, in that it's not. it's not what I'm interested in. I mean, this piece especially, I mean, as it sort of ended up, looks an awful lot like Turrell. But it's not about phenomenology, it's not about, the main point is not about phenomenology, it's sort of, spirituality or even really about space. It's about a representation, really, really trying to represent darkness. And I feel, I've done these drawings of darkness, but I felt that to really, after looking at darkness a lot, I felt that there really is this sort of light that comes out of darkness, and so it's kind of a weird paradox, but trying to use a light box to create darkness in a way that's really more accurate than a drawing, which totally absorbs light. It was really just this. I mean, it's more. I mean, conceptually, it's more photorealism than it is light and space, weirdly. But I mean, of course, I mean, of those light and space artists, there are a lot of them who I like, but Turrell is not the one that.